My fiance gave me an ultimatum: hand over part of my company to her parents or call off the wedding. I chose the one thing she didn't expect. You'd think love and business wouldn't collide like this, but they did. And the wreckage wasn't just emotional, it was calculated, cold, and frankly, insulting. I've spent years building my tech firm from the ground up. No investors, no inheritance, no shortcuts, just long nights, cheap coffee, and a drive that nearly burned me out more than once. So when Alexa looked me in the eye and asked me to give her parents a stake in my company as a wedding gift, I laughed at first. But she wasn't joking. She said it was about respect, about gratitude, about family. I said it was blackmail. She said I was being selfish. I said, maybe this wedding shouldn't happen. She didn't expect that. But sometimes when someone pushes you to the edge, the only sane thing left to do is jump, just to remind them you can land on your feet. I met Alexa 2 summers ago at a rooftop party thrown by a mutual friend in downtown LA. She was wearing this green silk dress that caught the light like it was made for the sunset. I remember thinking, she doesn't belong here. She belongs on a movie set. And then she laughed, loud, unapologetic, the kind of laugh that cuts through the noise and makes people turn their heads. I was hooked. I'm not usually the type to chase anyone. I'm quiet. I work more than I talk. But that night, I couldn't stop myself. We talked for hours about books, tech, weird conspiracy documentaries. I found out she was an interior designer, just starting her own freelance gig. She said I had serious founder energy. I thought it was cheesy, but I smiled anyway. We started dating a week later. Back then, things felt effortless. Alexa was thoughtful, funny, and fiercely independent, or so I thought. She'd bring lunch to my office when I skipped meals and help me review pitch decks when I was too tired to think. She didn't understand everything I did, but she acted like she cared. That was enough for me. I wasn't rich, but I was getting there. After years of building my company solo, I'd finally hired a small team. I was still working late, still eating frozen burritos at 2 a.m., but I could see the light at the end of the tunnel, and Alexa was there holding the flashlight. I let her in, fully. I talked to her about my financial stress, my fears of failure, and the imposter syndrome I couldn't shake even after landing huge contracts. She was the first person I cried in front of since college. She said she admired me, said I was the most driven man she'd ever met. Looking back now, I wonder if that admiration was real or if it was admiration for the idea of what I could become. But in the moment, I believed her. I fell hard. I started making space in my life for her, rearranging priorities, skipping work things to meet her parents, and planning vacations I normally would have dismissed as bad for the budget. I even softened me, the guy who once scheduled bathroom breaks during product launches, found myself painting sample swatches on a Sunday afternoon just because Alexa thought it'd be fun. When I proposed, it wasn't some grand gesture, no hot air balloons or flash mobs, just a quiet dinner at our favorite sushi place and a moment that felt right. I asked, she cried, said yes. That night, she held my face in her hands and whispered, "We're gonna be unstoppable, babe." I believed her. God, I really did. For a while, planning the wedding was like building a second life together. She handled most of it, which I appreciated. I was never the party planner type. She'd show me fabric samples, flower arrangements, and even menu options, and I'd nod and play along, pretending to care about whether the napkins were ivory or cream. She made it easy to believe we were equals, a team. But somewhere along the line that started to shift. I didn't notice it right away. The changes were subtle. Little requests started to pile up, bigger assumptions about what I could give, what I owed, not just to her, but to her entire family. Still, I held on because love, I thought, was about compromise, about showing up even when it's inconvenient. I figured if I just gave a little more, she'd meet me in the middle. Turns out I was walking toward a cliff and she was already on the other side, waiting to see if I'd jump. At first, it was little things, subtle, easy to brush off. Alexa would ask if I could upgrade her parents' hotel suite whenever they visited. Not just a king bed, but ocean view, minimum. I obliged. Once, twice, 3 times. She called it hospitality. I called it manageable. Then came the dinner bills. We'd go out with her family, and somehow the check always ended up in front of me. At first, I paid without thinking. I mean, I was doing well, why not? But after the 4th or 5th time, I started to wonder if anyone even noticed. One night, we were at a high-end Italian place in Beverly Hills. Her dad ordered a $180 0 cents bottle of wine like he was picking out gum. No offer to split. No thanks. Just a nod, as if it were expected. When I brought it up to Alexa afterward, gently, she rolled her eyes. Babe, they raised me. You're not just paying for dinner, you're showing them appreciation. I didn't know how to respond to that. Was this a new rule no one told me about? Still, I let it slide. I told myself she just saw things differently. Different upbringing, different values. I could adapt. But the pattern didn't stop. It grew. She started making comments, tiny jabs, dressed as jokes. Like when I bought a new car and she said, "Finally, now you don't look like a startup bro still living off Red Bull and ego." Or when I wore my old hoodie on a weekend errand and she muttered, "You know you're not in college anymore, right?" She said them with a smile and kissed me afterward like it was all harmless, but it chipped away at me. And then came the comparison game. Did you see how my cousin's fiance got her that Cartier bracelet? Not that I need one, she'd say, her voice syrupy, but still, it's the thought, right? Or my dad built his company with his brothers, real family legacy stuff. It's so nice when success is shared. Shared. That word started to haunt me. I began to realize how often ours meant mine to give and hers to receive. The conversations about our future were always tied to what I could provide and what she or her parents would get in return. She'd visit my office and make offhand comments like, "You should let my dad redesign this place. He knows people in commercial real estate." Or, "This whole setup could use a woman's touch. My mom could totally help with branding." I'd smile, nod, then spend the next hour scrubbing their names from my mental whiteboard. It wasn't just that she wanted to be involved, it was the entitlement. The assumption was that everything I had was hers by default, and by extension, her family's too. And whenever I pushed back even slightly, she'd turn cold. "You know, my ex never made me feel like this," she said once after I said no to a weekend trip because of a product launch. He knew how to balance priorities. That one stung, not because I cared about her ex, but because she knew exactly where to hit. I started to feel like a credit card with a pulse, valued for what I could do, not who I was. Still, I stayed. Because I remembered the girl from the rooftop party, the one who laughed too loud and called me the most driven man she'd ever met. I kept hoping she'd come back. But the further we got into wedding plans, the clearer it became. That version of Alexa might have never been real, or if she was, she'd buried herself under layers of expectation, entitlement, and family pressure. And I was starting to suffocate under it all. It was a quiet Thursday night, one of those evenings where everything felt still but charged, like the air before a storm. Alexa sat at the dining table, her laptop glowing with Pinterest boards and spreadsheets labeled wedding budget, humming to herself as she flipped between tabs. I was across from her, nursing a reheated cup of black coffee, half listening, half scanning my inbox. Then she looked up, smile subtle but intentional. "I've been thinking," she said, tone airy like she was floating a cute idea. "We should do something really special for my parents." I raised an eyebrow. Special how? "Well, we've done dinners and trips, but I mean something that really honors them, like long-term, meaningful." I nodded slowly, already on alert. "Okay, like what?" She paused for just a second, too calculated, then said, "What if you gave them a small stake in the company?" I blinked. "A what?" A stake, a symbolic percentage, just a couple of shares, not controlling, obviously, she added quickly, just enough to make them feel included, valued. I thought she was joking. I actually smiled, waiting for her to laugh. She didn't. Alexa, I said carefully, you want me to give your parents part of my company? As a gift? She nodded. Yeah. I mean, it's not like they'd interfere. They just want to be part of something bigger. My dad's always admired what you've built, and my mom could bring you clients through her network. Win-win. I set my coffee down. You know how hard I work for this? Years of all-nighters, ramen dinners, and barely paying rent. Your parents weren't around for that. They didn't invest a cent or offer advice. Why would I give them equity? She sighed, like I was being unreasonable. Because they're family. Because this is about more than money. It's about showing gratitude, building trust. It's about ownership, I countered. Real legal ownership. This isn't symbolic. You're being narrow-minded, she snapped. This is what people do when they care about each other's families. This is what people do when they're trying to secure leverage. The room froze. She stood up and walked to the sink, back turned. You always act like everything is just yours, like this company isn't part of our future. That's because it isn't ours, I said, trying to stay calm. It's mine. I built it long before we met. She turned back around, arms crossed. If you can't even share a small part of what you have, what does that say about your idea of partnership? I'm not refusing to share my life. I'm refusing to be manipulated into handing over pieces of it like party favors. The rest of the night passed in near silence. I slept on the couch. The next day was uneventful until my phone rang mid-after. It was her mother. Eric, she chirped. I just wanted to say thank you. We're honored. I frowned. Sorry. Honored about what? The equity? Alexa told us such a thoughtful gesture. You're really making us feel like part of the family. I nearly dropped my phone. I never agreed to anything like that. A pause. Then her tone turned cold. Well, that's not what Alexa told us. I ended the call without another word. When I got home that evening, Alexa was setting the table, humming again like nothing had happened. I didn't bother with pleasantries. Why did your mom call to thank me for something I never agreed to? She barely flinched. I figured if they believed it was already happening, it would be easier for you to get used to the idea. I stared at her. So you lied to your parents to manipulate me? I gave you momentum, she replied. Sometimes people just need a push. A push? Alexa, that's not a push. That's a setup. She bristled. You're blowing this way out of proportion. No, you're selling a fantasy using something I bled for. And the worst part? You're not even sorry. If you're not willing to compromise, she said sharply, then maybe we're not ready for marriage. Is that a threat? I asked, stunned. It's a reality check, she said, because if you can't see the bigger picture, I don't know how we build a life together. That was it. That was the moment. Something snapped. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just looked her in the eye and said, then maybe we don't. Her face dropped. You're seriously ending this over a disagreement? No, I'm ending it because this isn't a disagreement. It's a breach of trust. She didn't speak, just stood there frozen. I grabbed my keys and left, drove for hours with no direction, windows down, the city buzzing past me. That night, I didn't sleep much. Dave offered me his bed, but I stayed on his couch, staring into the dim ceiling fan above. My mind wouldn't shut off. I kept replaying every moment. Her voice, her justifications, the way she twisted trust into leverage like it was a fair exchange. Somewhere between midnight and dawn, I realized what bothered me most. It wasn't just a lie to her parents. It wasn't even the demand for equity. It was how easy it was for her to gamble our relationship on something so transactional. That's when I knew if I stayed, it wouldn't be the last time she crossed a line. It would just be the first I let her get away with. And I wasn't going to live like that. I woke up on Dave's couch with a stiff neck and a brain full of static. The sun was already out, stabbing through the blinds like it had no mercy. I sat up slowly, my body heavy, my mind heavier. Dave was in the kitchen, quietly making coffee. He didn't say anything, just handed me a mug and sat across from me like he knew I couldn't handle words yet. Eventually, I broke the silence. I think I blew up my engagement last night. He didn't flinch. No, man, she didn't. I let out a dry laugh, but it didn't feel funny. My chest ached in a way that was more than just heartbreak. It was like something had cracked and everything I thought I knew was leaking out. How did we get here? I muttered. You tell me. I spent the day trying to work, pretending to care about emails and client calls, but every few minutes my mind dragged me back to her, to us. At that moment, I said, then maybe we don't. That line played on a loop in my head like a chorus I couldn't turn off. I wasn't even sure if I meant it or if I just said it because I didn't know what else to say. By sunset, I was back in my apartment, sitting alone on the edge of the bed we used to share. Her perfume still lingered on the pillows, her robe still hung behind the bathroom door. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt like it used to. I started second-guessing everything. Was I too harsh? Should I have waited before walking out? Is there still a way to fix this? My chest tightened. I didn't want to call her, but God, I wanted to hear her voice. Just to see if she was sorry, if she missed me, if there was still something left to hold on to. I typed and deleted a dozen texts. Are you okay? Can we talk? I never hit send. Instead, I sat in silence and let the weight of everything crush me, the wedding plans, the memories, the future I thought we were building. It all felt like a dream someone else had lived. One I'd just woken up from. That night, I didn't sleep. I just stared at the ceiling, watching the shadows move across it like ghosts. I kept waiting for clarity, for some emotional breakthrough, for a sign. But all I got was silence. The next morning, I called my lawyer, not because I needed legal advice, but because Olivia was one of the few people who saw through people like Alexa. When I told her everything, she didn't interrupt. She just listened, and when I finished, her voice was calm but firm. You're not crazy, she said. You're just waking up to who she really is. It hit harder than I expected, because deep down I knew it was true. Alexa had been charming, magnetic, and full of fire. But behind that fire was calculation, control, entitlement masked as ambition, and I'd ignored the signs. I remembered the first time she rolled her eyes at my old car. The way she subtly suggested I dress a little more CEO when we went to dinner with her parents. The time she called my office a little too startup grungy and offered to have her mom's friends spruce it up. I'd brushed it all off because I loved her, because I wanted to believe we were partners, because I thought love meant compromising, even when it hurt. But now, sitting in Olivia's office, hearing those words out loud, I couldn't keep pretending. Still, a part of me wanted to fix it. I wasn't ready to let go, not fully. Do you think she'll reach out? I asked quietly. Olivia looked at me for a long time, then said, if she does, it won't be because she's sorry. It'll be because she wants another shot at control. I nodded, but the ache in my chest didn't go away. That night, I went back to the apartment and cleaned out her things. Not because I was done, but because I needed space to think without smelling her shampoo or tripping over her heels. Each drawer I emptied felt like ripping off a Band-Aid from a wound that wasn't healing right. I didn't throw anything away, just boxed it up and stacked it by the door. It wasn't closure, it was survival. The next morning, I woke up to silence. Not just the absence of Alexa's voice, but the absence of emotional chaos. No arguments, no second guessing, no waiting for the next manipulation, just silence. And I realized I'd missed this. Not being alone, but being at peace. I made coffee, showered, and sat down at my desk for the first time in days without the usual pit in my stomach. The sun poured through the window, like a quiet vote of confidence. I didn't feel better, not exactly, but I felt steady. That afternoon, I called Olivia again, not as a friend, but as my attorney. It was time to put guardrails around everything I'd built. She walked me through the steps calmly: amend your operating agreement, explicitly require unanimous consent for any share transfers, update access rights, separate personal and business finances completely. Most of it I had already done in bits over the years, but now I see it differently. Before, those legal boundaries were about protecting the company from outside threats. Now, it was about protecting it from people I once trusted. I'll send over the paperwork tonight, she said. Don't sit on this. I won't, I replied. After the call, I opened my business documents and went line by line, every clause, every loophole. I closed them. I wasn't just healing emotionally, I was fortifying structurally. This company was mine. My blood, my nights, my risk. No one would ever dangle marriage or family or guilt as leverage against it again. The work was oddly therapeutic, precise, clear, unlike the mess Alexa had left behind. For the first time in weeks, I slept through the night. Over the next few days, I returned to a rhythm. Early mornings, team calls, long walks alone. I started going to the gym again, cooked real food, caught up with friends I'd ghosted while drowning in wedding prep. They didn't ask questions. They didn't push. They just welcomed me back. It reminded me that I had a life outside of her, a good one. One night, I sat with Dave on his balcony, drinking beers and staring out at the skyline. You know what's messed up? I said, ugh. I was more afraid of losing her than losing myself. He looked at me for a long second, then said, that's exactly how you know you made the right call. I nodded. He was right. The fog was lifting, not all at once, but enough for me to see the road again. The wedding venue called to confirm the final details. I told them the event was canceled, no reschedule, no need for a refund. Just cancel it. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I'm sorry, the woman said softly. I smiled, genuinely this time. Don't be. This was the best decision I've made in a while. That night, I took her boxes, everything of hers, and dropped them off at her parents' doorstep. No note, no drama, just closure. As I drove away, I didn't look in the rearview mirror. There was nothing left back there I needed to see. Back at my place, the apartment felt bigger, not emptier, just more honest. I opened a fresh notebook and scribbled 3 words across the top of the page. Build without fear. It wasn't just about the company. It was about me. I wasn't healing for revenge. I wasn't bouncing back to prove anything. I was rebuilding because I remembered who I was before I let love become an exchange. I was never just someone's fiancé. I was a builder, and now I was building again from the inside out. About a week later, I got a text from an unknown number. Hi, Eric. We haven't spoken directly, but I think it's time we had a conversation. Please call me, Mr. Carter. I stared at the message for a few seconds. Her dad, of course. My first instinct was to ignore it, but then something shifted in me. No anger, no anxiety, just curiosity. So I called. Eric, he answered on the first ring. His voice had that polished corporate smoothness I remembered from the one dinner we shared. I appreciate you getting back to me. I said nothing, let him talk. I just want to say, I'm sorry things escalated the way they did, he continued. Jenna told us her version, but, well, I wanted to hear directly from you. I finally spoke. With all due respect, Mr. Carter, it's too late for that. I understand, he replied quickly, and I don't want to get into the emotional weeds. I just wanted to say, if the equity thing was the issue, I think we can find a more creative solution. That got my attention. Creative? I asked flatly. Yes. Perhaps not equity per se, but maybe a formal advisory role for me or a strategic partnership. Just something that allows us to collaborate. We're all still family, after all. I almost laughed. Still family? I let the silence stretch just long enough to make it awkward, then said, I think there's been a misunderstanding. This isn't about finding loopholes. There is no we. The engagement is off, permanently. He didn't respond right away. So I added, and just so we're clear, I have every conversation recorded, every request, every veiled threat, every miscommunication. I don't plan to use it, but if your daughter or anyone else tries to twist the truth, I will. His voice changed, slightly colder. There's no need for that. Then we're good, I said, and hung up. I leaned back in my chair, heart calm, mind clear. For the first time, I realized just how far I'd come. Not long ago, that call would have shaken me. Now, it was just another test I'd passed. A few days later, I got an email from a mutual friend. Subject, have you seen this? It was a link to a blog post titled, When Love Meets Greed, What I Learned from Losing an Entrepreneur Fiancé, written by Jenna. Of course, it was full of vague implications, half-truths, and emotional manipulation disguised as self-reflection. She never mentioned me by name, but the timeline, details, and descriptions made it obvious. My phone lit up with texts, friends, colleagues, and even clients asking if it was about me. For a moment, I considered firing back, posting screenshots, publishing my side, but I didn't. I didn't need to. Instead, I wrote a short message on my company's blog. Building anything from scratch, especially something you love, requires more than time and money. It takes values, non-negotiables, and the courage to walk away when those are threatened. To every entrepreneur out there, protect what you build and never let guilt disguise itself as loyalty. That was it. No names, no drama, just truth. And the response? Overwhelming. Dozens of comments, hundreds of shares, people I hadn't heard from in years messaging me with support. Even clients who had hesitated to work with a young founder told me they respected how I handled it. By the end of the week, I wasn't the guy who got manipulated by his fiancée. I was the guy who stood his ground and walked away. And that mattered more than any wedding ever could. It's been 3 months. 3 months since I walked away from the wedding. 3 months since I packed up the future we were building and left it in the past. I wish I could say I bounced back immediately, that I felt liberated and powerful and ready to take on the world, but the truth is, healing doesn't look like the movies. It looks like waking up at 3 a.m. because your brain won't stop replaying old conversations. It looks like deleting the Spotify playlists you made together. It looks like walking past the bakery where you used to get Saturday morning croissants and needing a minute to... But slowly, almost imperceptibly, it changes. One morning, I realized I hadn't thought about her for an entire hour after waking up. That was the first win. Then came the day I saw a couple holding hands in the park and didn't feel bitter, just still. That was the second. Healing isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It just settles in, like sunlight gradually filling a cold room. And somewhere in that quiet, I found clarity. I realized that what hurt the most wasn't losing Alexa. It was losing the version of myself I had to become to keep her. I shrank to make room for her ego. I compromised until I couldn't recognize my own boundaries. I confused peacekeeping with love. And I let someone treat my success like a shared resource instead of a personal achievement. But here's the thing, I let it happen. That's a hard truth to swallow, but an important one. Because if I gave someone else the power to undo me, then I also have the power to rebuild, and rebuild I did. I threw myself into the business, not as a distraction, but as a way to reconnect with the version of me I liked best. The builder, the thinker, the guy who solved problems instead of ignoring them. And the business responded. New clients, stronger team morale, bigger vision. But the biggest win? I stopped apologizing for what I built. I used to downplay my success to make other people comfortable. Now, I own it. Not arrogantly, but unapologetically. Because every line of code, every late night, every hard decision, it all came from me. And no one gets to demand a piece of that just because they shared a dinner table or wore a white dress. I've also started saying no more often, not because I'm closed off, but because I finally know my limits. No to partnerships that feel transactional. No to friends who only call when they need something. No to guilt disguised as love. And in saying no, I've made room for better yeses. Yes to long walks with no destination. Yes to dinners with friends who make me laugh until my ribs hurt. Yes to building not just the company, but a life that feels like mine again. The other day, someone asked if I was seeing anyone. I smiled and said, I'm seeing myself for the first time in a while, and honestly, it's going great. They laughed, but I meant it because here's what I've learned. Love isn't a transaction. Trust isn't a negotiation. And peace is worth more than any partnership that threatens it. I'm not angry at Alexa anymore. She showed me who she was. And in doing so, she gave me the clearest look yet at who I want to be. In that's a gift I'll never return. Last Sunday, I stopped by a little local cafe I'd never noticed before. No Yelp reviews, no neon signs, just a quiet corner, a chalkboard menu, and the smell of fresh espresso. I sat by the window, laptop open but untouched. I wasn't there to work, just to be. That's when she walked in. No dramatic music, no slow motion, just a woman in jeans and a navy sweater, holding a book under her arm and ordering a cappuccino like it was the most natural thing in the world. She glanced around and noticed the seat across from me was the only one open. Mind if I sit? She asked. I gestured to the chair. Be my guest. We didn't talk much at first, just two strangers sharing space in silence. But then her phone buzzed. She rolled her eyes and muttered, God, clients? And we both laughed. Turned out she was a freelance designer, small studio, just her and two others built it from scratch. She told me about the clients who ghosted her, the all-nighters, and the pride of sending her first real invoice. Her stories mirrored mine in quiet, beautiful ways. No pretense, no performance, just honest grit. At one point, she paused, sipped her coffee, and asked, Do you ever feel like no one really gets what it takes? I looked at her for a second, then said, Yeah. I used to think love meant someone had to. She smiled. And now? Now, I think love is someone who doesn't need to get it, but respects that you do. She didn't say anything, just nodded slowly like she knew exactly what I meant. We talked for another hour, then another. Eventually, she looked at the time and said, Same spot next week. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't hesitate. Yeah, I said, same spot. I don't know where it's going. I'm not trying to label it. I'm not hoping for some fairy tale rebound. But I do know this. I feel calm. I feel curious. I feel like myself. And that's more than enough for now. Some endings don't need grand finales. Just a quiet chapter break and a new page.